I'd rather create something that others criticise than create nothing and criticise others.
If you have high quality product behind the bar, it's like a weapon.
It's not about the figures, it's about who those figures are.
The Hospopreneurs Podcast.
I'm going to drink this beer.
Yeah, let's crack them.
With James Henderson.
Hello and welcome to episode 34 of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. Brett Gibson, the venue manager of the Triffid, drops us a wealth of info today. As the first person who inspired me about hospitality, Brett pushed me to learn about foundational concepts like distillation methods and booze types while I worked alongside him in my first bar job at Iceworks. We look at everything from stage height to the expression of creativity and how Brett worked alongside Powderfinger Bassist John Collins to implement his vision and establish the venue we sat in to record. Relax and enjoy. Hello and welcome to the show, Brett.
Thank you, mate. Good to be here.
Good to have you. I've mentioned you on the show before being someone who's really inspired me about hospitality early on in my journey. But I want to delve straight into the episode and ask if you have a crazy hospitality story.
One that sort of springs to mind was early in my career as a duty manager for friends of our family who owned a hotel out in Toowoomba, actually. I locked up the place, thought that I'd checked everything was fine. One thing that was always one of those 1% of things that you were told as a kid, or particularly as a duty manager, check everything, make sure there's no one in the toilets. But it was a fairly quiet night, so I had to get out of there and be back early in the morning. And I came back in the morning, so, I'd probably only been home for 6 hours, back up and back into it again. And as I got there, the alarm was going off, so I was like on the spot, So police are immediately on the way. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, God, I wonder how long this has been going. Hopefully not too long. Police went there, so I'm assuming that it wasn't. And a guy had slept in the toilet the whole night to the point where I didn't know it was him. And he was trying. The ironic thing, he was actually trying to break out. So then there's two cop cars with sirens coming, thinking that someone's broken in because it's like 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
This poor guy was boozed up, obviously from the night before, and couldn't get out, and he was just sitting there like these police had him in handcuffs, and he's crying, going, I was actually trying to break out. So that was a weird one for me, and I since then I've never failed to check the toilets. So that was a weird one.
Yes.
I've got some clangers, but that's one that come to mind that was certainly weird and a lesson learnt, I suppose. So yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Yes. Let me know if you have any other crazy stories along the way here.
I'm sure there will be.
Brett, I want to ask you why you do what you do. A lot of people talk about what they do, but I want to go deeper than that. I like to ask on a deeper level what it is that really inspires you.
Yeah, what inspires me and gets me out of bed every morning is just being creative. I was born into the industry, so it's always just sort of been in the blood to an extent. So the blueprint of a metropolitan pub was what I grew up on, and that blueprint you don't really veer away from. It's a tried and tested blueprint, right? So when I sort of moved to Brisbane from Rockhampton early days, what sort of got me inspired and kept me in the industry was being creative. So what I love about the job that I do now is that we have so many meetings around just being creative. So creating events, creating festivals, looking at bands and how we can make the experience for the patron better. Trying to break that mold of just coming, watching a band and then see you later. Trying to create more of an experience. So fundamentally, the things that make me do what I do and make me inspired is being creative and the buzz of creating something and it being successful. So the conceptualization is probably something that really gets me going.
Yes. What is it about that creativity that you really like?
I think because I come from being an artist. I mean, obviously I'm in the hospitality industry, and there's a considerable amount of my work is also in live music. So I was in a band, and I've always been in a band since I was 16. So I think it's just that creative and artistic part, because I don't get to play in a band much anymore. We play like 1 gig a year or every 2 years or something. So you yearn for that creativity.
Yes.
Because that's the artist in you coming through.
Do you think everyone feels that?
No, I don't.
Okay.
And that's not a bad thing either. I mean, certain people want to come and look at a P&L for 8 hours and talk about numbers, and that's fine.
In a way, because I've got one foot in both camps.
Yeah.
Because for me, when I look, this is going to sound crazy to anyone who doesn't get this, but when I look at a P&L, I find that it's actually a super creative activity.
Exactly.
Because I use my imagination to create a scenario based off some numbers on a page.
Yeah, and you know, that's where people's different skill set and approach to things. 100%. You know, I've worked with people who are exactly like that. For me, I just get buzz out of coming up with a concept and then putting it to the team, and then that concept just evolves into something that I never even thought was potentially possible.
That's always the way too. Even no matter how we conceptualize an idea, it always manifests differently to what we imagine. And I wonder why. Something that I've thought about is just because we simply can't map all of the variables in our minds because we're dealing with a very complex environment.
Yeah.
Because reality is far more complex than we can possibly comprehend.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating. A lot of guests talk about the idea that creativity is what really inspires them, and this expression. I feel like it can be a very logical industry. It can also be very creative as well, and that's what I like about it as well. So tell us a little bit more about what you do now.
At the moment, I work at the Triffid, so I run the Triffid. It's first and foremost a live music venue that holds 850 people in the live music room, and attached to that is essentially a beer garden, an old school beer garden that, you know, fits 300 to 400 in, and we operate that almost as a separate business in the fact that we can have a show on in the live music room, and it might be the Rolling Stones, but everyone in the beer garden can go about their business and have a beer and chill out, even if they're not attending that show. So John Collins, who was the bass player in Powderfinger, it was his brainchild. He thought that there was a hole in the market for that size capacity, but he was also very passionate about trying to change the way we watch live music, particularly in Brisbane, if not the country. Obviously, he's had a lot of experience in being in live music venues throughout the world. So, yeah, he was really passionate about that. I met him through a friend. We had lunch once and then had a beer another time, and he sort of expressed his love for music, and we liked the same sort of music, and we got on, and I could really see his vision about changing the way we watch music, or the way people came to his venue to watch music. So I got on board just as in a consultancy capacity after a venue that I ran called the Iceworks, which I'm sure you're aware.
I've mentioned that on the show. That's where we met.
So yeah, I learned a lot. So from setting up a venue from scratch, particularly from the hospitality side of things. So that was sort of where I came into play. But throughout that period, we just realised that we loved working together. So that's why I went and did some other stuff for a Sydney pub group for a couple of years, and now I'm back. So I run the Triffid. I also do some consultancy. I have a consultancy business called Lotus Liquid Creative, which is a company that basically helps people who are experienced or not so experienced in the hospitality industry, who have an idea and want to bring that to life from an operational point of view and infrastructure and setup. Or they might say, we want a brewery or we want a bar, but we don't really know what we want to do. So then we pitch ideas and concepts to them. And then we take it from conceptualization right through to operating and helping them. And so I do that and then run the Triffid. So back to the Triffid, what we do here obviously is music, but we're trying to create more of an experience around watching a band.
Sorry to interrupt you there. I wanted to. This is a question that's come up there that you touched on, and I think that's where we're going to head with this one. What is it that you guys are really doing differently? Because you've talked about how the idea is about having a different experience with live music.
Well, historically, any band that I've seen, particularly in this city and to a lesser extent all over the country, it's what time's doors are 7:30. Okay, we'll get there at 7:25, maybe 7:30. Do we want to watch the opening act? Maybe not. Essentially, we turn up, we grab a beer. By that time, there's an act playing, or potentially the headline act. We watch the headline act, and then basically 5 minutes after that act's finished, it's lights on, and it's see you later. then it's like, okay, what are we going to do now? So prior to that gig, we've probably said, oh, let's meet at a restaurant at 6 or 6:30. Let's have something to eat. We'll have a couple of beers and then we'll go down to watch the show. Then the show finishes, lights on, see you later. What do we do now? Oh, there's this bar down the road, but and then everything, sort of the group that we were with disperses, and sort of the night seems to drift away from people's grasp. And then it's like, oh, we might as well go home. So there's so many experiences that I've had. Obviously, I love live music that I've had that are like that. And subconsciously never really noticed it, I think, until sort of JC brought that to light, saying, you know, let's change, like, let's try and let them come to the Triffid as an experience, as a whole night. So why don't you come here and have something to eat and have a drink? It's a chilled beer garden vibe. Doors at 7:30. You don't have to go in at 7:30. We go around and ring a bell every time the act starts. So then the venue starts to flow in terms of the first bell rings. We're not into the opening act, but we like the second act. So the second time we hear that bell, we'll go inside, we'll have a beer. Then when that's done, we've got another 15 minutes. We go outside, have another drink, come inside, watch the headline act. Then the act finishes, and we're very, very specific about how we operate the venue when it comes to the band finishing. We don't turn the lights on. The lights sort of go up easy, but at a level where you're in a bar still. So you're not obligated to leave. Then you can come outside and sort of finish the night off and have a couple of drinks and then head home. So we're trying to create that experience from the start right to the end. So the experience of watching a band isn't just the 45 minutes they're on stage. Obviously, there's some commercial realities to that as well, which is
Obviously, you keep people around longer.
Driving more revenue, you know. So
everyone wins in that scenario.
Everyone has a win. Exactly right.
Yeah.
So that's fundamentally what I think we do differently. And then one thing that we always wanted to be is, well, what we were was John Collins, obviously in one of the biggest bands that the country's ever produced, is the owner. Then I came on board sort of from that hospitality perspective, and we were both in bands, so we were sort of always about the artists. You know, how does the artist feel in the green room? Making sure they're comfortable. Because, you know, there's certain venues that spring to mind, like, you know, the Corner Hotel in Melbourne is just, you know, it's an institution. And if you talk to artists, why is it an institution? The moment you walk in the door, you got your hand shaken and you were looked after, because that's what we care about. We want to look after the artist. When you look after the artist, they want to come back. They might be on the rise and play the Triffid and sell it out, but then the next time they're probably selling double the amount of tickets. We're finding that bands want to come back and do 2 nights or 3 nights instead of trading up to another venue, because they're almost friends. They're part of the family, you know. There are 2 things that I think we're executing pretty well. There's some things that we're probably not, but we're constantly working on those. But yeah, from the outset, it's just about making the artist feel at home and making an experience for the patron. So, you know, if you're getting those 2 things right, you're looking after both people on each side of the fence, and the rest sort of works itself out.
So you've touched on there about how the experience changes a lot more for the customer. Can you tell us a bit about how you do make the artists really feel welcome and looked after?
It's an attitude. It's not so many things that you actually do, but it's an attitude towards them. It's probably a more known thing throughout smaller venues, and I think even can change that attitude in smaller venues, because it's like, I've been on a tour where you've sold the place out and they'll give you 2 drink tickets, and it's sort of a real us and them. It's sort of like a front of house, back of house internal situation, you know, like they're the artists and we're the venue, so it's almost a struggle between.
So they create a barrier.
Yeah. And that's created by the people within the venue, not the artists, because the artists go to a different town every night.
Yeah.
You know, these guys, they're used to it. The things that we really drum into our staff, and obviously particularly management, because they're the first point of contact that these artists have, is go see them, go shake their hand, ask them how their day is, how's the tour been, just little things like that, and then making sure that we go in, you know, 2 hours before they arrive and the air conditioner's on. So, you know, these guys are on the road. When they're selling 800 tickets in Brisbane, these guys aren't sort of rookies, you know, they're campaigners. So rest assured, they've probably just spent 3 months on the road. Now, the last thing they want is, you know, to get in their room and it's hot as hell and some of their rider isn't ready, because, like, they spend so much time in a green room. And this is what we try and drum into our staff who haven't been on that side before. And this is where JC really sort of gives them some knowledge about, you know, they're in a bus for 6 hours, then they get to a venue, we haven't got some water out there for them, you know, just little things like that. So it's shaking their hand the moment, you know, I sort of always try and say, if they've reached 20 metres within the front door and we haven't shaken their hand, we're probably doing something wrong. Just little things like that. It's not so much what we do, but it's the attitude that we have towards them.
When you say that, it actually makes me think it's being hospitable. It's just hospitality.
Exactly
but
right.
it's bringing that hospitality to a live music venue.
Yeah.
Maybe the marriage is difficult to find if people come from purely a music background and they're maybe not necessarily understanding how hospitality works.
Well, for that night, they're really part of our team. I mean, 800 people aren't coming to watch us, you know, open beers.
Yes.
You know, they're coming to watch a really great band, ideally. So how it should be is, hey, welcome. Like, how are we going to make this the greatest night that anyone's ever had? How do we create memories in this place, you know? It's one thing that, it's funny, like, you just get feelings about certain spaces. And from the day one when we walked in here, and there was still a skate ramp in here and it was concrete, you just sort of got this feeling that there's going to be some magic moments in this space. I don't know why, but I just feel it.
I'm wondering or how you build a space that creates that vibe. And did you have input into the design of the venue as well?
No, well, we were sort of, the venue design was basically, I mean, in terms of the structure, that was why JC chose it, because it was oval and it had ribs, and so you could immediately recognise where you were. It was a different space, really different to any other venue. So in terms of the design, we were sort of governed by, like, it was already there. In terms of design, I was involved in sort of most things, and I was sort of learning as I went, just trying to be a bit of a sponge, because it was a first one for me. But, you know, the things that we deliberated about were not crazy things, but, you know, there was a 2-week argument over the height of the stage, because we wanted to make sure that every single person in the venue could see. I mean, it makes complete sense, right? But there was this standard height for X amount of people, and it was 1.X was the height for anything between 600 and 800. And it's like, well, but ours is 850, so we want 850 people to be able to see and enjoy the experience, not 600 to 800, because there's some grey area there, right? And, you know, how many times have you've been to certain venues and you can't see, like, it just, because if you're a little bit shorter or, so little things like that was something that surprised me, well, not surprised me, but I was like, wow, we're spending a lot of time on this. And then I slowly, throughout that process, I realised how important it was. But the design, we were sort of governed by the ribs and the oval shape of the structure. So we just sort of had to run with that.
I've also heard in the media recently about a joint venture for a new venue. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing there?
Basically, the same guys involved in the Triffid, who also have a stake in Secret Sounds, who have some stuff to do with Splendour in the Grass. We thought that there was another hole in the market in the sort of 3,000 to 4,000 capacity. You know, there was a venue called Festival Hall. I never went there, but heard a lot about it. Previous to that, there was a venue called Cloudland up on the Bowen Hills. These two venues were really synonymous throughout Brisbane music scene. And since Festival Hall, it got knocked down. I think it was the government knocked it down, and then they built sort of high-rises. It was on Mary Street in the city. So since then, we particularly JC and those guys have always, you know, who Powderfinger played at numerous gigs there. Obviously loved that joint, and also since then there hasn't been anything in the city and valley area that sort of fills that void. So, you know, for a while we've been talking about that capacity and where, and, you know, we think that when we wouldn't be stealing off anyone, we're sort of just rather taking from people, we're sort of making the pie bigger.
I was going to say exactly the same thing.
So, we think there's a lot of bands that are touring Australia that don't come to Brisbane. There is some venues, and don't get me wrong, I'm not, and no disrespect to those venues, but is there enough, and is it central enough? So things like that. So then became a site available So Scott Hutchinson from Hutchinson Builders obviously loves music. He's on the board for Q Music. Just loves live music and the arts. So he's always trying to support that. Mm-hmm. He saw an existing structure that he thought could be great size for what we're looking for. Yeah, so we sort of went into that as a joint venture. So he purchased the business, so he'll be our landlord, and Hutchinson Builders are going to build the venue. Where all systems go, from about March 19, we think will open. Mm-hmm. I don't have a name yet, so we're still calling it 312 Brunswick because that's the address. There's a lot of creative minds in this venue, so there's some names getting thrown around that some people don't like, some people do. So that's going to be a hard thing. But yeah, we want to come with the same ethos that the Triffid has, which is trying to create a great experience for the patron and trying to create a great experience for the artists. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just think that from a capacity perspective, it makes sense, and we think that it'll breathe life into the Fortitude Valley and the greater Brisbane music scene.
I'd like to ask you, Brett, what are you learning about or exploring at the moment?
Because I'm all constantly trying to learn. I try and surround myself with people who are really successful so I can just slowly steal some information off them and be a sponge. But at the moment, just probably recently, I'm starting to learn how to execute and follow through with those things that I get creative with. Mm-hmm. A big thing for me for the new year this year was just to execute some of these ideas, because a lot of them I thought I didn't take right through. When you've got those entrepreneurial sort of things in you have all these ideas, and sometimes I was probably guilty the last 12 months of not executing them to the point where I could make an informed business decision on whether to do it or not. Mm-hmm. So what I'm sort of learning is to how to continually take those ideas and concepts to a point where I make a business decision whether we follow through with it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's not the best answer, but
that's a good answer.
I think
everyone's learning about something different, and you've obviously have that self-awareness to go, hey, look, I'm not executing on my ideas. That's what I want to do. Yeah. And so that's something that you're learning about and executing on. A lot of very creative people, and there are a lot of very creative people in this industry. They have all these great ideas, and people in general, everyone's got an idea. Everyone's got ideas. They talk about ideas. They just talk about them, and then they do nothing.
Exactly. A smart guy told me not long ago is that because sometimes us creatives get on our high horse a little bit because we've got all these great ideas and it's our intellectual property in inverted commas. But he said there's no intellectual property if you haven't done anything.
That's right. I've got a friend who calls it intellectual masturbation.
Oh, that's great. So you don't have any IP if you've got no runs on the board. So that is where I think when he actually said that, I sort of thought, that's a really good point. And everyone's got ideas, but how many people have executed those ideas? Yeah.
I'd like to know what innovations or innovative techniques you've seen in the industry.
I think probably for me, obviously the innovation relates to technological advancements in the industry. For me, I think, online rostering and things like that have really changed your time management a lot. We worked with that when I worked for the Riversdale Group, which was a pub group from Sydney. And then obviously with licensing laws and a lot of red tape and covering your butt with public liability and all these legal and licensing things coming in or already existing. Online security management, I suppose, or incident reporting. You log an incident and it automatically records your CCTV. So platforms like that, and then online rostering. And then I think something that, as a general thing in the industry, which probably I don't think people put enough value on, is rewards programs and those crossing over into your point of sale system. So I think they're probably the three big things that I've seen in the last sort of 2 years that really valuable to the industry.
Because another question I like to ask is what changes you'd like to see take place. Is that to do with the POS system, the reward system you just mentioned, and what innovations?
It's something that we as a business, we have a think tank sort of once a year, and that's with our management and our booking agent and everyone in sort of a senior role in the business. We have a think tank, and there was something that we sort of pinpointed was something that was really underutilized in the venue, and rewarding people who come here all the time. I must admit, it was probably not driven because I never placed enough importance in it, because I always had this idea that rewards programs were for RSLs. I found them annoying, but it's because I wasn't creative enough in how we delivered it and marketed it and rewarded people, you know. So the guy down the road, you know, let's say it's a point system, he gets his point system and a free beer, but you know, wouldn't he rather a ticket to a rock and roll show instead? So we have these things in our business that we can reward people with different stuff, and music is always one of them. But we never really placed enough importance on it as a management team, because probably I was one of the most negative about it, and it's sort of something that I've slowly starting to think that we probably had wrong all along. So we're starting to concentrate on that. That's probably the biggest focus for us as a business, particularly because we're in an area of Newstead that's growing. So new people are moving in every day. How do we try and make them become loyal customers as soon as possible? And it's those programs.
What's your creative process? Before you enter there, you talked a little bit before, you like to conceptualize an idea. How do you firstly come up with that idea? How do you get into a creative state to create that idea? And then how do you develop that and then execute on it? That's a massive question. So break it down into whichever section of that you'd like to answer the most.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I have a process. I haven't probably thought about it enough. No one's ever sort of asked me that question. But I wouldn't say I have this sort of blueprint or process that I go through every time. I have to see and touch and feel things before I can get into sort of conceptualizing a bar or a venue or just a general concept. Traveling, I try and do as much travel as possible to different. I mean, America probably the last few years.
It really gets us out of our headspace.
Totally.
By putting themselves physically in a different environment, it transports their mind to another environment. But we can create that sort of a process to transport our minds into an imaginative, creative state as well. And that's something that I personally really love exploring and thinking about. And I write a lot on Medium about those sorts of things. But I wanted to see if you had a process that gets you into that creative state. But you mentioned traveling.
Yeah, I think traveling, and I need to, as I said, I'm sort of a touch and feel sort of guy, you know, or I try and read as many sort of cultural, I subscribe to every bloody thing possible, in particularly in cities that I think are influential. So, you know, most hipster stuff comes out of Brooklyn, like, you know, so I'm trying to read some sort of article, blogs that are out of Brooklyn or New York City or Los Angeles or London. Or
what resources do you recommend there?
I just signed up recently to one called Thrillist, which is a pretty cool subscription, I suppose it's called. It just sort of touches on a lot of different stuff. There's certain publications that are released that sometimes people aren't privy to. So, you know, I have contacts within booze companies that are privy to trends, people who do studies on trends for certain years. So I get them sort of, you know, on the down low sometimes. So they're good to read. They don't give me, oh yeah, this is a trend, let's go with that. But I'm always trying to sort of have a deviation of that and put your own spin on it. I'm always trying to be innovative, particularly in my sort of, you know, in my fishbowl, I suppose, and be the first to do certain stuff. And whether they work or not is another thing. But I'm always looking at the next thing. You know, my cousin works in the industry in Singapore and works for a company called Proof & Co. He's he's one of the best bartenders in the world, I would say, or certainly influential. He's always thinking about that sort of stuff, and we have good conversations about that. You know, he said to me, there's certain social events that trigger certain trends. The World Cup soccer was in Brazil, so many people are seeing Brazilian food on the TV, and you know, so it's these subconscious things that trigger trends. Not all the time, but I just love talking about this sort of stuff. Like I can talk about it for ages, and you know, similarly to what you asked me, what's other people's process, and you know, how did they come to this idea or concept, and yeah. So, but for me, it's sort of a real touch and feel. I like, you know, people that I'm constantly working with, the team at the Triffid, kick ideas around, and somehow it turns into something. That's what I love. Like it's an
organic
collaborative
thing,
or an organic process. Yeah,
it's a being. That's what I love about ideas, is that they're organic and they evolve and they have some sort of another factor comes into play. It's another variable, changes the game, and you grow this thing that was just a spark.
For sure.
Oh, I love trying to conceptualize or like visualize this conceptual idea. Like that's just my creative mind getting crazy.
Back in we had a venue. I ran a venue called the Elephant Hotel for the Riversdale Group. Part of that venue was a Greaser Bar, and we're always very
another live music venue.
Yep. We always had a real strong vision for that brand and what certain heroes for that brand were. And the main hero for that venue was always the cheeseburger. And we were like, okay, this is a year and a half ago, nearly 2 years now. How do we reinvent this burger? The ingredients don't change, but how do we put this back into people's minds that this is the best burger in town? The burger thing just went crazy. So all of a sudden, within a 5 kilometre radius, you've got 15 burger joints.
Yeah.
And how do we penetrate the market and get the consumer thinking about our cheeseburger? So we came up with we did a video which was a burger
food fight.
That created some buzz and got people thinking about us again. Then I was like, oh, maybe we set up a stall in some other venue and pop up, and then that sort of got me thinking. Then all of a sudden, from that idea became the Burger Festival brand. That I never sort of finished that sort of concept, but it was always in the back of my head. And then last year, we ended up executing that. The Brisbane Burger Festival was born, which was a massive success, and it was crazy. It was just it teamed down rain all day, but so that's going to be an annual thing that we do, and then that won't be exclusive to burgers. In year 2, year 3, year 4, we'll probably start to implement some music, and who knows where that brand can go. Like that could be the Brisbane Burger and Music Festival, or Blues Fest, or whatever it may be. But again, as you said, those ideas can evolve and just keep growing organically.
That's why I like business too, because it's the same thing. It's just ideas that then help people, that add value to people's lives. To me, that's what business really is. In some way. But before we get caught up in all of that and get carried away, I'm conscious of our listeners' time as well. So I'd like to ask you, what's your biggest challenge right now?
My biggest challenge right now is starting to put back of house and infrastructure in place. I suppose as a group, we don't expand and go to the new venue, but things in the Triffid start to fall behind. Sort of that robbing Peter to pay Paul. I find it's a mistake that so many operators make when they want to grow the business. And going back to what we're talking about, ideas, I think if you apply that organic process to a business perspective, it needs to be the same. So let's grow, and when we try and get market share, because we just go, okay, this restaurant isn't really standing up on its own, but we're going to go again so we can get some scale. Maybe we get some buying power, our cost of goods comes down, the bottom line doesn't get any better.
It's unhealthy growth.
I see people grow too fast, and what happens is it ends up diluting the strong team that you had. So my biggest challenge at the moment is trying to develop other people within this business, and also try and get new people coming in to the new venue who are strong, because the culture we have at the Triffid and the management team and everyone's strengths is excellent at the moment. But if you go to another venue, then certain things drop off, and then all of a sudden a venue's culture is great when it's great, but it can turn in like 4 days. One person quits, you have to let another guy go, or someone can't do as many hours, and all of a sudden you're back to square one. So that's probably, I think, the biggest challenge in making sure that as a hospitality team and group, we don't let things fall behind, because our focus is concentrating on the new one. So just trying to keep everyone focused, I suppose, is something. And
maintaining that culture.
Maintaining the culture, yeah.
If someone wants to do what you do, what advice would you have for them?
I would say get behind the stick and just bartend and learn as much as you can. It's a really sort of generic answer, but if you like it, great, stay in it, but only stay in it if you're passionate. You can't teach passion. You just can't. And again, that's probably something that's been... I'm not reinventing the wheel here by telling you this, but you can't teach passion. So you have to love it, because it's not the most...
Glamorous industry
at times. It's really fun, but you've got to be passionate about it. I think you've got to be passionate about anything, right? So yeah, that would be mine. Just get in and try and work every part of the business. I think that's probably something that ultimately put me in good stead, because I grew up in hotels. Literally, we lived on top of our pub for 15 years or something. When you're going and asking your cellarman to lift 15 to 20 kegs and do the lines and scrub the floor, you got to know that you've done it before, or not that you've done it, or you certainly understand what that is, because you know that he can't do it by himself, and you might have to give him a hand. Just little things like that. Or my dad taught me that never make your staff clean up spew in the toilets. You do it first, as long as they see you, then you can ask them to do it, because they know that you're not scared of getting your hands dirty. So little things like that. So yeah, I suppose just learning each facet of the business, from cleaning a beer line to reading a balance sheet. You have to get the fundamentals. Again, pretty standard, but
how do people make that or move into that more management knowledge, in your opinion?
Well, for me, it was about just trying to work with the best people I could. I would rather be a duty manager at the best joint for 3 years than go to a shit joint and run, be the boss, venue manager or general manager, whatever it may be. So being smart about your career decisions as well, and, trying not to be a deer in the headlights, or, I'm big about documenting goals at least once a year, maybe twice, to reassess. And so I think having a clear understanding of where you want to go, and then making sure you're surrounding yourself around the right people, so you can learn and grow with them.
How do you document those goals?
I literally just write them down. It's funny, I do it a fair bit, and it's funny, in years where at the end of the year, I feel like I've had a bit of a up and down year, or maybe scattered year, or, whether it's stuff happening personally, and then I think, you know what? I didn't actually reassess my goals halfway through the year. Like, there's a clear correlation with career and personal things that it's like, I feel really messy at the moment, and it's like, of course, I haven't gone back to those and seen how I'm tracking. Another thing I learnt after a while was that if I wrote them down in my own handwriting, for some reason they become more real, rather than saving a Word document on my computer.
Well, you described before that you're a very tactile person, a very kinesthetic person, and so that would, to me, that makes sense that it would be more real to you if you physically write it.
Yes.
Even do you speak it as well? Because I think that would engage.
Yeah, it's
wholly.
interesting. I've never really consciously thought about that. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Maybe I'm learning every day, James.
Aren't we all? I'd like to ask you what your plans are for the industry and how you want to contribute ultimately to hospitality.
Obviously, you want to be creative, but continually create concepts and spaces that hasn't been done before, wherever I am, whether it's if in 10 years I find myself in another city or wherever it may be, or in Brisbane. But obviously I'm really passionate about the Brisbane industry at the moment, because I think it's great. I think it's growing, it's pumping, and we've got so much more growth to come. But yeah, I think what I want to do is just continually create really cool spaces, and I'm probably don't want to be exclusive to hospitality either. I'm just, whether it's creating really innovative workspaces for creative people or startups, or where I got that idea and I just put it in the back. Just thought, if I ever find myself in a position where there's some commercial space and I think we can do, I was in Amsterdam, and which they say is the startup capital of the world.
That's a big call.
It is a big call, but that's what I heard. Now that's only on the street, so you can probably look that up and see if it's true. You probably already know, but there was this totally cool workspaces and it's hard to explain, but they have their own bars and little phone booth things for conference calls, and It was so cool, and I just thought, wow, that's awesome. Experiences is what I'm about. So as long as I'm creating those, I'm going to be pretty happy.
My creative objectives and I suppose trajectory are very similar. So that totally resonates with me.
Yeah.
My last question for you today, Brett, is what's next for Brett Gibson?
Yeah, well, next for me is focusing on not only just the Triffid operation and continually trying to develop the business and look at other revenue streams for the Triffid. That, and obviously designing this new venue in Brunswick Street. That's going to be huge. Like, it's already ramping up in terms of build and design, so we're working really closely with architects right now, and probably traveling to America and having a look at some venues that do that capacity well, and trying to learn from what they do, what positive experiences they give the patron. Yeah, so that's the next thing. And
Awesome.
It's massive. It's going to change the music and hospitality scene, I think, definitely in the Fortitude Valley, but in the greater Brisbane area, I think. Yeah, and continually just trying to maintain the culture, the good and positive culture that we have in the business at the moment.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
No worries.
I'm super excited about what's to come.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for being on the show today, Brett.
Thanks, mate. Been a pleasure.
Stay in touch with the show after hours at Hospopreneurs on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Do you know a hospopreneur? Shoot us an email, hospopreneurs@gmail.com. Creativity and innovation in hospitality. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson.